Hello everyone, and welcome to the director's commentary of Games, Schools, and Worlds Designed for Violence. And the first thing I want to say about this video is I was very nervous about making it, which seems kind of silly in retrospect, but I know where I was coming from, which is that I am talking about video games and school shootings, and the idea of even having those things in proximity to each other as someone who has grown up during the past 25 years and has had, many arguments with people arguing for video games and why they're not harmful to society and all of that. I think you know where I'm coming from. This was just a scary topic for me to talk about publicly, because while I am absolutely not paralleling playing video games with shooting up a school, that's kind of, I know YouTube commenters, and I knew that that would be kind of a reaction to it. But something that I've been really pleased to see is that this is really connected to a lot of people in a way that I didn't think it was going to. And I think it's because everyone's kind of had these experiences. There are a lot of people in high school right now who have commented on it and talked about feeling certain ways about how their schools are designed, or just feeling nervous in classes or whatever. And so I think my initial apprehension at talking about it was kind of replaced with a realization that, like, oh, everyone is actually already thinking about this all the time. And so I am glad that I decided to take it on. Using Gears of War was another kind of weird choice in this, because Gears of War 5 just came out, or I guess it's just Gears 5 now, they've dropped the war, but Gears 5 just came out, but I'm talking about 1 here because that's kind of the only one that I've played. And there have been a number of people who have, I think fairly legitimately questioned what games are really doing in this video at all, because this isn't a video about video games, really. It's a video about design and how we interact with designed spaces. And I knew that when writing this thesis that spaces affect the way we act, I was going to kind of need a, absolutely bulletproof, pardon my wording there, example of, this is an undeniable example of spaces defining how we act. In my mind, there was nothing more obvious than the idea of, an obvious cover shooter like Gears of War. A game that everything in it is just planted so you can crouch behind. And that's so, if you play video games, you can just so easily recognize, oh, that's what this is. We tend to think of ourselves very individually, groups might do this, but I do this. And because of that, I knew that selling a space designed for something in real life affecting our behavior would be kind of a hard sell, because people would be like, well, my behavior doesn't change based on where I am. And so cover shooters are a great example of well, actually it does, because we all play Gears of War this way, and we play that way because the world is designed for it. One of the biggest influences on this video was the Slate article called "The Mad Rush to Bulletproof American Schools," and that talks about Sandy Hook and Fruitport and most of the other schools that I talk about in this video, and it's very good, and I really recommend reading it. And then the other influence on it, which I use a lot of footage of but just strike me as so bizarre, are these kind of local news programs that have done features on this school, and the features are just so uncritical and kind of they're treating it like it's fun or it's cool, check out all the high-tech measures in this school. There's that clip I use a bunch of times of the reporter standing in the middle of the hallway while the smoke cannons come down at him, and he's filming himself on his phone, and he's like, whoa, check me out. And I just kind of wonder, what was their goal there? I know local news is in a bad spot right now, but it just seems so weird to me to present these sort of ideas like they aren't inherently horrifying, because to me, they could be nothing else. I spent a long time asking people and figuring out where can I get footage of panopticons, because there are a couple that exist in real life, but like everything, I like to have footage of games doing it. And so I settled on a scene from the end of The Evil Within, and also the Battlefield 4 map. And both of those are panopticons, and so I think it worked pretty well, actually. Something that I've been really struck by, that in reflection I should not be surprised by at all, is just how many people from other countries have seen this and thought about the fact that America just seems like a horror movie from an international angle. And that was surprising to me for a couple of reasons. One, because I didn't know how international the audience was, and that's great. But also because I think I'm just so America-centric, as are most of the people who live here. It's a joke about Americans that we only think about ourselves. But I think it also really speaks to how quickly we normalize things. Like, even though I think I'm a person who takes these sort of events seriously and feels, absolute kind of emotional pain and trauma and empathy with the people who are experiencing them, it's still something that it's like, oh yeah, that's a thing that happens. And so for people in, any other country to hear me talking about school shootings like this, or just buildings being designed with this idea, is shocking to them in a way that I didn't even think it would be, because I'm just so used to it. This is a very serious video, and a video that I thought about a lot, but I also am very glad that I got to use Max Payne 3 in this, because Max Payne 3 is like one of my favorite games, and a game that I feel like isn't talked about that much, and it has so many strengths. Max Payne 3 has so many strengths, and one of those is this remarkably naturalistic level design. And I didn't really think about that until I was looking for cover shooters to play, and I was playing Gears of War, and I was like, okay, what's another game that I could get footage of? And I thought, oh, Max Payne 3. But then when I started playing it, I realized, like, this actually doesn't look like a cover shooter at all. There's just so much care put into, like, creating a world in a legitimate feeling way, as there is in Red Dead Redemption 2, that it kind of made me think about, like, oh, games do these things differently. There's not a one size fits all for shooter level design. Also, any chance to mention Vanquish is like something I'm very happy to do. That clip right there, that was from my headshots video. If you're an eagle-eyed viewer, you might have noticed that. I captured more Max Payne footage for this, but it was also just an excuse to play more Max Payne 3. Another reason that I'm using Red Dead footage specifically is because I am using a lot of music from Red Dead Redemption 2 in this video. It's just one of those things that video essayists joke about. It's like, oh, I'm going to use 5 seconds of this game so I can justify using music throughout the entire thing. Now, the brutalism aspect in this video went a really different direction than I initially thought of, because as I say here, I had heard from everyone that these buildings were made to stifle student protests. My dad, who is not a particularly like political radical at all, talked about it. I talked to like other activist friends who were like, oh yeah, I've definitely heard that. And it was only after I started looking into it that I kind of learned, like, nah, that's always kind of been a myth, at least about brutalism, that was the case. But I was very happy to find this article by Mark Masick, who that's one of my favorite sources I've ever used, which is a leftist zine from UT Austin in 1990. It's just an incredibly like Jacob Geller source to use. Because I knew that schools thought about student protests, and I knew that they did not want them, and kind of like had many discussions and I went to UNC, and that's a place where there are tons of student protests all the time because of the history of white supremacy at that school. And I know that schools think about how to kind of stifle those student protests. Keita Jackson from Kotaku actually talked about how she went to Oberlin and she felt the same thing. And I think of Oberlin as like, ooh, the loosey-goosey leftist school. But like even there, the school is designing to kind of keep students in check. And so it's this really interesting contrast of like, some of these buildings feel like they're supposed to and they're not. But then there are all these other things that don't feel like they're supposed to, and that's what's really affecting your behavior. And I would recommend people read this article that Masick wrote, because there are just like so many things. Those things that Zach Frazier is talking about right now. This is Mark Masick's words, but it is Zach Frazier, fellow video essayist, who is reading them. And man, I've used Zach in many, many videos. He was the voice of Henry Ford and Madison Grant in the Wolfenstein video. He's been in others. He just has a great vocal timbre. Also, Easter egg in this clip right here, Laura Crone, also an exceptionally talented video essayist and one of the voices in this, told me that she was in a like informational school shooting video made in college. And I was like, what? How did I not know this? And she sent me it, and it was like exactly the kind of thing I had been looking for in terms of like all these security cameras and police looking stern and people with guns. And so in the couple scenes where it's like students in the dark, the person with pink hair, you can't really see her face, but that's Laura. And so I was very happy to include her in this. This is, as the subtitle says, protests at UNC in 2018. Boy, they've got a lot of cops. When I was at UNC, I was in a sit-in in the chancellor's office because UNC refused to stop using sweatshop labor to produce their like university merch. And we were like, hey, don't do that. And we were totally legal sitting in on this office, and then just like seemingly dozens of cops kind of flooded into the building and were like, get the fuck out. So we did, because they all carry guns and seem to have no qualms about brutalizing students. That quote that Laura just read is from the Slate article on school shootings, and I think it's absolutely fascinating that it's so recent that no one really knows what works. You know, I do a lot of research in my like real life job and value research really highly. And this is just such a recent occurrence that everyone's doing things and no one knows what works, what doesn't, what the effects are. And we are testing them on generations of kids. This fire drill analogy actually came up pretty organically for me because I was playing devil's advocate with myself. I was like, okay, I have this thesis that, you know, like it is affecting and traumatizing kids to have these sort of things. But I did fire drills, you know, and I didn't feel, I feel like they didn't occupy the same space, even though they're also about a potentially omnipresent danger. And pushing myself like that, I think actually made the video much better because it serves to highlight why this is a different kind of threat and carries a different kind of mental weight for anyone experiencing it. I'm using sad Red Dead Redemption 2 music here, which I think fits incredibly well, even though this is not a Western video. A lot of people have said in the comments that that scene of kids piling desks in front of the door really got to them. And it's another aspect of my like desensitization that I saw that and was like, oh, that's a good clip, and didn't immediately think like this is the most horrible thing I've ever seen, which it kind of is. So I'm really happy with how this video turned out. It's one of the ones that I'm more proud of, and I talked about it a little at the beginning that it's something that I was kind of scared to take on, but I also think it just represents everything that I want to do with this channel, which is talking about institutional power and architecture and how art affects us. It kind of brings all those things together, and it does so in an emotionally affecting way. And everything that I said, I truly believe on a like data and kind of logic and ration level, But I also think that it is really important that this stuff is emotionally affecting, because that's what changes behavior. You know, that's what makes people stop and think about things. You can look at statistics all you want, but seeing kids piling desks in front of a door and kind of like coming to grips with the psychological weight of this stuff, I think has the potential to change our behavior a lot more. And so because of that, I was really happy with how powerfully this video turned out, if I can say that for myself. Anyway, that's this director's commentary. It got pretty dark, but I think that's unavoidable with this sort of video. I appreciate you listening, and like this one, all future videos will have a director's commentary that will come out on my Patreon, so stick around, and I'm glad you're here.